listening to the Shared Security Podcast with Tom Eston and Scott Wright, exploring the trust you put in people, apps, and technology.
This summer, as you prepare for vacations and time with friends and family, be sure to also think about protecting your digital privacy while you travel. Laptops, smartphones, and key fobs are becoming frequent targets for criminals looking to compromise your personal information. That's why I recommend Silent Pocket's product line of Faraday bags, wallets, and other gear to help you stay off the grid. Visit silentpocket.com to check out their great line of products to help make your summer travel experience much more private and secure. And don't forget, listeners of this podcast get 15% off during checkout using discount code SharedSecurity. Joining me on the show to speak with us about medical device security is John Nye, Senior Director of Cybersecurity and Research and Communication at CynergisTek. Welcome to the show, John.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
Tell us a little bit about your current role and maybe a little bit about how you got into cybersecurity.
Absolutely. I actually started, professionally working in cybersecurity when I joined the military. I was in the Army for about 5 years as a security officer. It was fun because I was enlisted, but I had officer orders. That makes for a very tricky military career. So got out of that, went civilian, and I'm more than happy I did that. I've worked at a few different companies doing mostly pen testing and internal audit type work. So a lot of finding flaws and letting other people fix them. And then the last about 5 years now, I've been doing consulting. So at this company, CynergisTek, I've been here about 4 years. We do consulting for primarily healthcare, but it's been a great learning experience. Just before this, I did a lot of banks and universities and things like that. Healthcare is a very different animal.
Yes, it definitely is. So we get a lot of questions from our audience about just medical devices and the security and privacy of those devices. And I'm assuming that a lot of those people that may ask those questions have pacemakers or insulin pumps. And I think there's a big concern because, someone could die if those devices malfunction or if they're hacked, kind of like we see in the news with all these stories. In your opinion, should people be concerned about all these vulnerabilities and the hacks of these devices?
Yes. So bluntly, yes, they should be concerned. So whether you are a cybersecurity pro, or if you're a clinical engineer, a biomed tech who actually works on these, or any member of staff who uses, buys, and supports these devices, eventually you or someone close to you is going to become a patient. And as a patient, the last thing you want to worry about while you're searching for care is how vigilant that provider's been in protecting their medical devices to ensure your care and in turn your health. So you don't want that to be impacted by an attack on the device involved in providing your care. And many of the vulnerabilities presented by these devices themselves are due to a lack of technical capabilities built into the actual equipment, as well as a lack of continuous security support by the manufacturers. It's a major problem. They very rarely update or fix these. And the risk of these vulnerabilities being exposed can generally be lowered or mitigated. So hospitals and organizations that have these devices in their networks, they have the ability to mitigate the threat by putting other controls around the devices, stricter security controls than what these devices can actually have. However, hacking and malicious attacks directed at these devices is really serious because it's a wild card. It's really hard to detect, even with really good detection software, until it's too late. And that should really concern anyone involved in patient care or having care provided to them. And in some cases, due to the amount of information and the various types of devices that are on a hospital's network, when an attacker has infiltrated and is actively hacking a device, they very well may assume it's actually a computer, not even realize this thing's a medical device that's keeping a patient alive. And now most, if not all, of even the bad guys out there would probably draw a line at this will kill somebody. But if they don't know that's what's happening, there's no distinction to be made. They can't stop.
It sounds very similar to how we see Internet of Things devices, right? How, like you said, can't be updated or they have very poor security. Is that kind of some of the hacks that we're seeing, like around pacemakers, insulin pumps? Are they all due to those defaults and just poorly designed security?
Yes. So I like to start this off with, if you go to you go to Target or Best Buy or wherever to buy some sort of IoT device, some smart device for your home network, you don't want to come home and have to spend 2 hours setting that thing up. Nobody wants to come home and spend 2 hours setting that up. And the exact same principle is heavily applied to medical devices too. So security is without a doubt an afterthought. So it's already been very established that pacemakers, for example, are vulnerable to hacking. We've known this since at least 2008, when a group of researchers, it was a Dr. Kevin Fu from Archimedes Center for Medical Research or Medical Device Research at University of Michigan, published an article, and he showed it's possible to extract all the sensitive personal information from the pacemaker and to threaten the patient's life because you can change the pacing behavior. So a pacemaker keeps a person alive by shocking their heart at a certain rate to keep it beating. They can make that stop happening, or they can make it happen more frequently. You can force a heart attack. So if they're able to reprogram the pacemaker to shut down, deliver jolts of electricity that would potentially be fatal. And in this device that they tested was not in a person. But had that been in a person, they could have easily got all the info they wanted. They could easily kill a person. These devices were made by Medtronic. We, as in the industry as a whole, has been warning Medtronic in particular for, more than a decade now. And they have done absolutely nothing to repair their devices. So every device they've made is as vulnerable as it was 10 years ago. That is terrifying.
Yeah. So what is the response typically from like Medtronic as a great example? Why do you think they're not taking it seriously?
They don't have to. There's absolutely no incentive for them to take it seriously. There's no money. There's no fines. There's no regulation. Basically, it comes down to it's all about profit. They make a lot more money by just pumping out new devices than they do by fixing the old ones. And they do. And what's even scarier is that these guys are releasing new devices virtually, monthly, very frequently, that use this same software that we've known has been vulnerable for a decade. Same device. They update it, but they don't fix it.
And now a word from our sponsor, Edgewise Networks. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is unprotected attack paths that allow threats to compromise vulnerable targets in the cloud and data center. But traditional microsegmentation is too complex and time-consuming and offers limited value that's hard to measure. But there's a better approach, Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation, delivering results immediately with a security outcome that's provable and management that's zero touch. At the core of Edgewise auto segmentation is zero trust identity, which automatically builds unique identities for all communicating software and devices by combining cryptographic properties of the workload with risk classifications. Edgewise protects any application in any environment without any architectural changes. Edgewise provides measurable improvement by quantifying attack path risk reduction and demonstrates isolation between critical services so that your applications can't be breached. Visit edgewise.net to find out more about how Edgewise can help stop data breaches. Now, besides just medical devices that are as implants or, inside humans, there's other devices and technology that we see in hospitals. Is there a risk of these devices being hacked, which could, lead to loss of life? So I'm thinking like life support systems in an OR is a great.
Well, a big one that I think is, a perfect murder weapon would be an infusion pump. So infusion pumps you see are basically in every single hospital room. And that's the thing that's hooked up to any inpatient that has to receive intravenous drugs, which usually includes some sort of a painkiller, an opiate of some kind. Inside of this machine is enough to keep the patient good for 48 hours up to a week. Well, the amount of opiates it takes to kill a person is a lot less than what you put in that device. So in 2015, we actually got a pretty good wake-up call. There was a guy named Billy Rios, and he demonstrated that infusion pumps had vulnerabilities that can allow you to give it an unauthorized firmware update and therefore give any amount of medication you want to the patients. So they used dummy patients that are designed to die when the conditions meet that a real patient would die. And they had hackers sitting outside the room, and they were able to literally kill every patient without even trying. So the FDA, now this did scare people, and it actually led the FDA to issuing the first and only that I've ever heard of recall of a medical device for cybersecurity vulnerabilities. It's very rare for the FDA to even do a recall without actual deaths happening. So in general, with drugs, medical equipment, any of that stuff, if you hear about a recall, it means that many people have suffered and died for that to happen. So this was a really, kind of a groundbreaking thing for the FDA to do. And we'll talk about the FDA more in depth in it. But so a couple points on this infusion pump. So this successful attack meant that the hacker could easily take all the PHI, all the patient health data that's stored on there. They can also use it to hijack other hospital devices and start ransom demands, so ransomware attacks. They can corrupt the device. That's very easy to do, and corrupting it makes it completely useless. So that can also, kill or at least endanger the patient that's hooked up to it. And then finally, they can also just use that as a jumping off point to get through into the rest of the network. So having these vulnerable devices goes so far beyond just that I could break in or a nation state could break in and kill a person, but also how much more damage they could do because of that device.
Yeah, and that's definitely an issue I see just in hospitals with, there's a lot of, I'd say, outdated equipment sometimes. I'm often surprised if you go to a hospital and you walk past somebody's screen, you might be seeing like Windows XP or Windows 7, something that's, out of life. And I think, in the news, we hear a lot about ransomware, and all the time, hospitals, cities, being compromised with ransomware. I mean, in your opinion, is the risk of something like ransomware on the same level as medical devices being hacked? Or, where should hospitals focus their dollars if they're trying to secure their networks?
It's a really tough job the hospitals have. So one thing you have to keep in mind is that devices are made for institutional use, not like IT stuff. So if you go buy a computer, that thing is designed to live for 4 years, maybe 5. Computers have a lifespan on them. Whereas a biomed device is, for one, really expensive. A cheap biomed infusion pump might cost you 20 grand, a cheap one. And on top of that, they're designed to last for a decade or more. So that leads to a huge amount of problems because you have all these outdated systems that are running on things like XP. And we see this almost daily.
So we briefly mentioned the FDA, but I'm curious to know, what is the FDA and other government regulators doing about this huge problem?
All right. So my first answer to that is nothing. Okay. Now, I'll say just kidding, and I'll caveat that a little bit. So the FDA did release their first round of guidance in 2014 and then really didn't do anything with it until just recently. And even then, again, this is guidance. I think guidance from the government is one of the worst ideas ever because nobody's going to listen. There's no reason to. It has no enforcement mechanisms whatsoever. And not to mention, it's geared mainly at medical device manufacturers, not at the hospital level where these devices need to be protected. So now today they're working on a draft pre-market cybersecurity guidance that provides updated recommendations for the manufacturers on how they can better protect these products against cybersecurity risks, a lot of them wireless, using Bluetooth, things like that. Also ransomware, catastrophic attacks, things like that. The guidance introduces 2 tiers of devices. So they've basically added these 2 separate sections that you can lump your device into, saying yours is a device with higher cybersecurity risk. So that would be anything that's implanted or neurostimulation devices. And then there's standard cybersecurity risk. And that's anything that's software based on potential harm to patients from cybersecurity threats. So that would be more like your infusion pumps. Things that are external to the patient makes it low risk. So the draft guidance outlines the documentation for inclusion in this pre-market submission to the agency to demonstrate that the design of a medical device has adequately mitigated the risk. So in English, they're saying if you manufacture a device, it should meet these standards, but we're not really going to do anything to make you meet those standards. Then HHS has gone and released best practices for cybersecurity, and it kind of discusses medical devices. But still, the only real enforcement mechanism that we have is the outdated HIPAA security rule. Because medical devices that receive, transmit, store, or maintain patient health information are covered under the HIPAA rule. And if they aren't included in an organization's risk assessment, they can then get penalized for it. That is essentially the only actual enforcement we have. And as we all know, HIPAA and OCR enforcement is not very effective.
Yeah, we still continue to see breaches all the time.
So at the end of the day, again, we basically say nothing. Some stuff's in the pipeline. They are working really hard right now to improve the exchange of health information. That's a big section in the Lower Healthcare Costs Act that they're working on right now. Our government doesn't move very fast, so maybe in 2 or 3 years we'll see that. But it does recognize security practices across the sector, the whole healthcare sector, and it would incentivize the actual entities, the people who own the hospitals, to adopt stronger cybersecurity practices. So it would encourage HHS to consider larger fines, doing audits, and also using that participation in this Health Exchange Information Act as guidance as to who to look at.
So is there anything from from our own industry, the cybersecurity industry, is there anything that we can do to help besides just kind of pontificate, that we need more regulation, we need laws, we need those types of things? Well, any other things that we can do?
So first off, the cybersecurity teams that are in healthcare, they need to start to look at things from a healthcare technology management perspective, HTM. So that means that both your clinical engineering and your IT security teams are now working to support the technology in the clinical setting. Right now, there's a lot of separation between those groups, and that is a huge problem. So we will frequently go into a hospital, and there is a clinical engineering staff that manages all of the medical devices. They do everything with them. They're the ones that make sure they have access. They're the ones that make sure they're updated and powered on, etc. Then there is a completely separate team that very rarely interacts that runs the IT security. So traditionally, there's been a serious communication gap. And due to the unfamiliarity of each team in working with the other team's stuff, we get an even more issues. So even in the most unsiloed, so of organizations where these two groups are not so clearly split apart, these teams still operate as though they are working to achieve different goals. So in reality, they're working to achieve the same thing: secure, available, safe patient care. That should be everyone's goal in the entire hospital, but that should be achieved using some advanced and efficient technology. Organization is ultimately invested to provide the best care possible for their patients, but they're missing so much by allowing those groups to act separately.
Well, this is great, John. So how can our listeners follow you, get in touch with you, see all the cool stuff that you've been working on?
Absolutely. So if you go to CynergisTek.com, we have all kinds of blogs that I write on there, as do several of my colleagues. And you can always follow me on Twitter, and it's at @endisnye, NYE_com. You're welcome to follow me.
Well, thank you very much, John, for coming on the show and talking about this very important topic.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.